When I set out for this little adventure, I didn't expect to be so impressed. The scene around me looked almost surreal, like a blend between ancient Roman grandeur and modern theme park spectacle. I was standing in front of a full-scale replica of the Roman Colosseum, not in Italy but in Germany, within a place called Europa Park. It's only a couple of hours' drive from Zurich, and for many, it's the German equivalent of Disneyland. From the balcony overlooking the illuminated arena, I began my experiment with the brand new Hasselblad X2D II camera, aiming to test just how powerful its in-body image stabilization truly was. The idea was simple. Could this medium format camera hold up during long handheld exposures, something most photographers would never dare attempt without a tripod? The lens I chose was not the most forgiving, an XCD to 0.5 55 volts, translating roughly to a 43mm full-frame equivalent focal length. That's a standard view, not particularly wide, and therefore more challenging when it comes to controlling handshake. Conventional wisdom tells us wide-angle lenses are far more forgiving, so what I was attempting bordered on reckless curiosity. But that was the point. I wanted to push the camera beyond what most people might expect. Hasselblad claims the X2D II camera can deliver up to 10 full stops of stabilization. That's an extraordinary number, one that seems almost like marketing exaggeration on paper. To make things even harder for myself, I wasn't holding the camera against my body. My iPhone 16 Pro Max sat between me and the camera, meaning I had to extend my arms awkwardly, keeping the camera about 40 centimeters away from my chest. This made the task much harder, but also ensured no one could accuse me of cheating by stabilizing against my body. It was pure handheld, raw, and slightly uncomfortable. I began conservatively, setting the camera at ISO 100, f/.5, and attempting a full 1-second exposure. For anyone who has tried handheld photography, 1 second feels like an eternity. Even the slightest tremor of your muscles is usually enough to blur the result. But when I reviewed the shot, my jaw nearly dropped. The image was tack-sharp, crystal clear, as if I had mounted the camera on a tripod. I zoomed into the details, checking the textures of the walls, the shadows, even the silhouettes of people in the frame. The only blur was expected motion blur from those moving through the scene. For a 1-second handheld shot at 55mm, this was nothing short of astonishing. Encouraged, I pushed further. I switched to a 2-second exposure. At first, my arms wobbled, and the result came out blurred. It was a reminder of just how physically demanding this test was, especially given the awkward position. But I tried again, concentrating more on keeping steady. This time, when I looked at the playback, the image was razor sharp. Not acceptable sharp, truly crisp and detailed, with clean edges and legible engravings on the structure. I repeated the test for consistency, and once again, the shot came out sharp. It wasn't a fluke. The stabilization was really working, holding everything together with impressive precision. At this point, I was starting to believe the hype. Still, I wanted to find the breaking point. Could I push it to 3 seconds? By now my arms were aching, but I went ahead anyway. To my absolute disbelief, the 3-second handheld exposure was also sharp. Looking closely at the lights, the walls, and the fine detail, there was no wobble, no smearing. Only the people moving in the frame betrayed the long exposure. For me personally, this was a world record. I had never in my life managed to pull off such a long handheld shot with any camera, let alone a medium format system using a standard focal length lens. It felt almost impossible, and yet there it was on the screen in front of me. At that moment, I was convinced Hasselblad wasn't exaggerating their claims. If I could achieve this kind of performance with a 55mm lens, then with a wide-angle lens like the 20 to 35mm XCD, which already delivers extraordinary sharpness and clarity, the potential must be even greater. Shooting handheld at 4-5, maybe even 6 seconds might actually be within reach. For many photographers, this could mean leaving the tripod at home for certain scenarios, opening up an entirely new way of shooting in low light. When I imported the images into Lightroom later, the reality was even clearer. I had captured a sequence of 5 shots, from 1 second up to 3.2 seconds. The first 1-second exposure was tack-sharp, no adjustments required. The second 2-second attempt was blurred, but that was my fault for fumbling, not the camera's. The subsequent 2-second exposure was perfect, crisp in all the right places, with only the moving figures blurred as expected. A second confirmation shot at 2 seconds turned out equally sharp, proving it wasn't just luck. And then, the crown jewel, the 3.2-second exposure. Even at ISO 100, lights began to blow out in some areas, but the image was undeniably sharp. The lines were straight, the walls were detailed, and the frame looked like it had been captured from a rock-solid tripod. I decided to do a little math. The rule of thumb for safe handheld shooting is usually 1 divided by twice the focal length. With a 55mm lens, that's about 1/100th of a second. From there, each doubling of shutter speed represents 1 stop. So, 1/50th, 1/25th, 1/13th, 1/6th, 1/3, 0.6 seconds, 1.2 seconds, to 0.4 seconds. By the time you reach 3.2 seconds, you're talking about more than 8 stops of stabilization benefit. And keep in mind, this was not in a controlled lab test. This was me, arms extended, fatigued, with an iPhone rig in the way, in the dark. In other words, it was worst-case shooting conditions. And still, the camera pulled it off. That's a remarkable achievement. Of course, the real magic of photography doesn't end with technical marvels, it comes to life in post-processing. Looking at that 3-second exposure, I applied a quick edit to reveal more detail in the shadows, balance the highlights, and straighten the lines. The difference was dramatic. Suddenly, the image wasn't just a technical test, it was a usable photograph, one I'd be proud to share. The sharpness held, the depth of the scene was intact, and only the people remained blurred from their natural movement. That, in fact, added a sense of life to the frame, a reminder of the moment frozen in time. Reflecting on the experience, I realized this test was more than just a demonstration of stabilization. It was proof that the boundaries of handheld photography have shifted. In the past, anything beyond a half-second exposure would almost certainly demand a tripod. Photographers traveling light or shooting spontaneously had to accept limits. But with technology like this, suddenly those limits expand. Long exposure night scenes, architectural shots, or even creative motion experiments can be attempted handheld, something that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. There are, of course, caveats. Subjects in motion will always blur during long exposures, and stabilization won't change that. The camera can only hold the frame steady, not freeze people walking through it. Still, for static architecture, landscapes, or urban scenes, this technology can be transformative. The difference it makes for photographers who want to travel without heavy gear is enormous. By the end of the test, my arms were shaking from the effort of holding the camera at that awkward distance. I knew I had pushed far enough. But the conclusion was clear. Hasselblad has delivered something special with the X2D II camera. Their promise of 10 stops might sound audacious, but my real-world results came close enough to convince me it's not an empty claim. For those using wider lenses, it might be even easier to achieve even longer handheld exposures. The implications are exciting. This wasn't just a technical test, it was fun, exhilarating even, to see a camera perform so far beyond expectation. Standing in front of that replica Colosseum, in the dim evening light, I felt like I was witnessing a glimpse of the future of handheld photography. And while my iPhone struggled to capture the behind-the-scenes in the dark, the Hasselblad X2D II camera had no trouble producing sharp, clean images that looked like they came from a rock-solid setup. It was a reminder of why we love photography in the first place, the thrill of capturing something magical in challenging conditions, with the right tool in hand. For anyone wondering whether this kind of stabilization makes a difference, the answer is a resounding yes. It's not just about avoiding blur, it's about opening up creative possibilities. Whether you've forgotten your tripod, chosen to travel light, or simply want the freedom to shoot in low light without compromises, this camera offers something liberating. The future of handheld long exposure photography is here, and it's astonishingly good. By the time I packed up my gear, I was convinced Hasselblad's innovation has changed the game, and I couldn't wait to see what other surprises this camera still had in store.